The Allen Lund Company thanks all the hard-working drivers who are moving goods across the country. We can't do it without you.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
Truckers who run in Oregon will be familiar with the state's weight distance tax. What those truckers may not be familiar with is a clause in the state's constitution that creates specific requirements for that tax, and those requirements have spurred action in the courts. I'll talk with Jana Jarvis, President and CEO of the Oregon Trucking Association, and State Representative Shelley Bosshart Davis. In a world where it seems like everything is going up in price, there is worry about insurance minimums increasing. We speak with OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department about what a significant jump could mean for owner-operators and insurance companies. And finally, Colorado lawmakers are taking aim at trucks that travel in the state during the winter with a focus on chain laws, and lane restrictions have their attention as well. Scott Thompson discusses that, plus a bill involving trucks and insurance in Georgia with our state legislative expert, Keith Goebel. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today, diesel prices are on the rise. Last week's average for a gallon of diesel went up more than 3 cents to $3.89 on the Energy Information Administration survey. That's the second straight week of increases. Diesel prices were up in 8 of 10 regions last week. The Gulf Coast recorded the biggest jump of nearly 6 cents. The trend of increases continues this week, according to ProMiles.com, which had Tuesday morning's average nationwide at $3.87 a gallon, up more than 3 cents compared to the same day last week. With the Super Bowl and Valentine's Day right around the corner, market analysts expected to see a bump last week for load volumes, but that wasn't the case. Landline Now's Ashley Blackford reports.
The number of loads decreased last week by 16%, according to DAT. Robert Rouse says the big game and holiday have only made an impact on a couple of markets, but it hasn't moved the national load volume in a significant way.
When we look at the overall strength of the spot market last week, we saw load-to-truck ratios decrease for all three equipment types. So far, we've not seen any indicator of load volume strengthening as we're coming into Q1. If we look at dry van freight specifically, the national spot market load post volumes decreased last week to levels seen in 2019 and early 2020 and the lowest in the last 8 years, with the exception of 2017 being a little lower. Load post volumes dropped by about 20% week over week, while carrier equipment posts were mostly flat. And that resulted in last week's dry van load to truck ratio decreasing by about 18% to 2.14.
National benchmark broker to carrier spot rates without fuel decreased for vans and reefer last week. Rouse says flatbeds did stay the same. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Ashley. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is ready to renew an exemption related to rear-view mirrors, but wants to hear from the public before making it official. The agency approving an exemption request from Stone Ridge, Inc. that allows trucks equipped with the company's Mirror Eye camera monitor system to use it instead of rear-view mirrors. A similar 5-year exemption was granted in 2019. This new one also runs for 5 years. Since 2019, Stone Ridge told FMCSA in its petition that the Mirror Eye system has been installed on over 1,000 vehicles in North America, logging more than 100 million miles with no reported incidents caused by the system. Stone Ridge says the camera system provides truck drivers with a greater field of view and eliminates blind spots. The new 5-year exemption is set to take effect on February 13th. Comments are now being accepted, however, through March 4th. The dozens of truck drivers who have so far weighed in on proposed changes to the CDL skills test process are raising concerns. Last week, FMCSA published a notice of proposed rulemaking aimed at increasing flexibility for state driver licensing agencies and applicants. The changes include giving applicants the option to take a CDL skills test in a state that isn't their home state, and allowing commercial learners permit holders who have passed a CDL skills test to operate commercial motor vehicles on public roads without a qualified CDL holder in the passenger seat. As of Tuesday morning, there were already 64 comments posted to the regulations.gov website. Many of those comments came from truck drivers opposed to lowering the standards necessary to acquire a CDL. One truck driver said he believes the proposed rule would result in more accidents involving commercial vehicles. Another said this proposal seems designed to benefit mega carriers with no regard for anything but making money. The public has through April 2nd to comment on the proposal. Yellow, the now-defunct trucking company, says it has paid off a $700 million loan to the U.S. Treasury Department, plus more than $151 million in interest. The loan was controversial when it was handed out during the pandemic and became a focal point of conversation as Yellow descended into bankruptcy. The $700 million loan was granted in 2020 under the CARES Act, which authorized the Treasury Department to give loans to companies that were critical to maintaining national security during the COVID-19 pandemic. Despite objections from the Defense Department, which argued that Yellow was not critical to maintaining national security, the loan was granted. Fast forward to 2023 when Yellow filed for bankruptcy and folded. The company has since taken to selling off its terminals and property, which helped them pay off the COVID loan this week. Nikola has opened up its first refueling station for hydrogen-powered trucks. It's in Ontario, California. The company says up to 40 Nikola hydrogen fuel cell electric trucks will be able to fuel up at the station daily. Nikola aims to have 9 such stations up and ready for use by this summer. The Canadian Trucking Alliance has a new survey out regarding highway safety. The alliance said with calls to improve highway safety throughout Canada getting louder, they want to hear from drivers, fleet operators, and safety managers to get insights into the challenges and feedback on possible solutions. Whether it's opinions on highway construction and poor road design, unsafe driving from other drivers, the lack of rest areas, or cellular coverage in various parts of the country, the Canadian Trucking Alliance wants to know your thoughts. The Canada Highway Safety Perception Survey takes just a few minutes and is confidential. The results will be presented to the CTA Board of Directors, Transport Canada, and other safety stakeholders to develop solutions that will improve highway and truck driver safety across Canada. A Pilot Travel Center in Tennessee will be closed for the next several weeks while renovations are done. When the Pilot on Lovell Road in Knoxville reopens this spring, it'll have a host of new features. It's part of the company's New Horizons project, which includes $1 billion in investments to remodel 400 stores across the U.S. A separate Pilot location in Knoxville, the Flying J Travel Center on Watt Road, is also being remodeled, but it's staying open through the process. And finally, Landline has a new resource for checking road conditions wherever you are. Landline has put together a one-stop web page with links to every road condition map for every state. A click will lead you to up-to-the-minute details on roadwork, crashes, weather events, detours, and more. You can find it all at landline.media under the Resources tab and bookmark it for further use. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Do you have a news tip? Maybe you have a comment about something you heard on the air, or maybe you just have a question about something happening in the trucking industry. Email us at landlinenow@ooida.com. Again, that email address is landlinenow@ooida.com. Marty Ellis and OOIDA's tour truck, The Spirit of the American Trucker, are at the Petro Truck Stop in Ontario, California. That's located at Exit 57 on Interstate 10. Stop in, say hi to Marty, and join OOIDA for a $10 discount. Next, I'll discuss a lawsuit over Oregon's weight distance tax with Jana Jarvis of the Oregon Trucking Association and State Representative Shelley Bosshart Davis. Ashley Blackford covers insurance minimums with Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby of OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department, and Scott Thompson covers possible chain law changes in Colorado with state expert Keith Goebel. We'll be right back. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Capital Reman, your leader in remanufactured diesel engines and components, is celebrating its 10th anniversary. Let us help you avoid costly downtime and repairs by visiting capitalreman.com today. Use code OOIDA10 to receive your member benefits.
Stock up on Howe's Diesel Treat, the nation's most trusted anti-gel. And to be safe from the harshest winter conditions, make sure you have Howe's Diesel Lifeline on hand, the fastest-acting gelling rescue product. Available nationwide, Howe's products are designed to keep you rolling through the toughest conditions. Visit howesproducts.com.
Attention professional drivers, are you behind on your tax filings? You owe money? Integrity Tax Relief Group frees drivers from IRS trouble. You watch the road, we'll keep an eye on the IRS. Call now, 855-976-4291.
Buckling up keeps everyone safe on the roads. Learn more at www.sharetheroadsafely.gov. Paid for by FMCSA.
Truckers who run in Oregon will be familiar with the state's weight distance tax, although they likely don't like it much. What those truckers may not be familiar with is a clause in the state's constitution that creates specific requirements for that tax, and those requirements have spurred action in the courts. You're listening to Landline Now, and I'm your host, Mark Reddick. Welcome back to the program. The state's trucking association and 3 motor carriers have filed a lawsuit, although it could have implications for any carrier that runs in the state. To get some details of what's happening, I called Jana Jarvis, President and CEO of the Oregon Trucking Association. For those who aren't familiar or who haven't run in Oregon recently, let's start with, if you would please explain how Oregon's weight distance tax works for trucking operations.
Well, thank you for that question. Oregon's weight mile tax is an antiquated system of taxation that years ago about half the states in the nation were utilizing, but they all abandoned it and moved towards a diesel tax. But Oregon hung on to the weight mile tax system, thinking it was the fairest form of taxation for the heavy vehicle industry. And it essentially charges a rate there are 88 different rates in Oregon depending on vehicles' axle configuration and weight. And so it's a very complicated form of taxation for the heavy vehicle industry and the trucking industry.
Your organization has filed a lawsuit against the state, along with 3 carriers, and also against several state officials over this tax. Can you explain what the basis is of your case?
Every 2 years, the state of Oregon conducts what they call the Highway Cost Allocation Study, and I have the privilege of sitting on that review committee. And typically, the analysis that comes back after we spend several months looking at the numbers and discussing what projects are going to be on the table for the future, comes back with an assessment of whether light vehicles are paying their fair share and heavy vehicles are paying their fair share. And typically speaking, the variances are within 1%. Occasionally, they've strayed outside of that, and there's sort of a general understanding that as long as it's within 5%, we would consider that equitable. But starting in the 2020 tax years, the report showed that trucking would be overpaying 3.5%, and passenger vehicles would be underpaying 1.5%. And then those variances continued to increase. When the study came out in 21-23 for tax years 2022 and 2023, it showed a 10% variance, which was later revised upward to saying that trucking was overpaying 16% of their fair share. And I apologize, but don't remember exactly how it equated light and vehicles, but they were underpaying their fair share. And then most recently, when we did the 23-25 highway cost allocation study, it showed a variance for heavy vehicles of 32.4%, with light vehicles underpaying 12%. And this is significant. ODOT estimates that 32% overpayment is about $193 million a year. The 16% overpayment is about half of that. So when you start looking at what it's going to take to correct this, and I'm getting policymakers and legislators who don't want to deal with it until the 2025 legislative session, we estimate we will be overpaying in excess of $500 million before this ever gets fixed.
Now, as I recall, in listening to you talk about that, this is all based on something in the Oregon State Constitution. Can you kind of summarize what the Constitution says that applies to this case?
Well, the Constitution calls for fairness and equity between light vehicles and heavy vehicles, and it defines heavy vehicles as anything 10,000 pounds or more. But essentially, the bulk of that, of course, is in the trucking industry. But it states that it needs to be fair and proportionate to the costs incurred for the highway system because of each class of vehicle. And so part of the analysis that goes into that highway cost allocation study every 2 years is, okay, we're going to be investing in these roads. We're going to be doing upgrades on this set of roads. Does that benefit passenger vehicles more or heavy vehicles more? And what percentages? And there are allocators that get applied to every project that ODOT has on their STIP, and that's how the costs are forecasted for the future. And so based on that, these are not even actual costs that have been spent, but this is based on what they forecast building. It's saying that we're significantly overpaying here in Oregon.
I want to talk a little bit about how these fees have affected trucking companies in Oregon, especially the aspect of the overpayment. Just for the 3 companies involved that have joined the Oregon Trucking Association in the suit, how much are we talking there?
Well, one of those members has overpaid about close to $500,000, and the other 2 have overpaid together about another $500,000. So it's very close to $1 million just for the 3 trucking companies. As I mentioned earlier, ODOT estimates that heavy vehicles will overpay $193 million this year. It's substantial.
And this is probably causing a lot of operations to have trouble just breaking even.
It certainly doesn't help because we all know trucking's been in a bit of a recession for the past 18 months. And it's one of the reasons that we've decided we just couldn't wait for them to decide they were going to get around to fixing it, and we needed to take legal action in order to get the state to address this issue. It isn't ODOT that can change the rates. It's just the state legislature that can do that. So it has to become a priority for policymakers in the state.
Now, in looking at this suit, is this basically about just the money, the overpayment, or are you asking for more from the defendants?
So far, it's just been about the money that we've overpaid. Certainly, we would like to see an injunction against the latest tax increase that started January 1, 2024. We'd like to see that rate increase get rolled back. Why continue to make this problem worse while we recognize it and we're waiting to fix it? Why make it worse? So that's one of the things that we've asked for in the lawsuit.
Are you trying to make this a class action to represent all the affected trucking operations?
We've certainly retained that as an option for the future. Mm-hmm.
Okay. One last question here. The suit, if successful, as you've said, would hopefully result in refunds. That's basically what you're asking for. And the suit is being filed by your organization and several of these companies. But the weight distance tax is paid not only by in-state operations, but just by scores of interstate truckers who operate within Oregon's borders. That seems like a complicated web to untangle. How would you go about refunding money to all those various trucking operations, or is that something you have yet to determine?
Well, it is a tangled web, and I don't know if that will happen that way, whether or not the courts will retroactively apply those credits or not. We're certainly going to ask for it. So that's a policy that has yet to be determined. But we certainly have asked for that in the lawsuit on behalf of these 3 carriers to date. It certainly highlights, however, the fact that our taxing system in Oregon is not equitable, it is not efficient, and it needs to be updated. And so in addition to addressing our taxing rates, we would like to be able, from a policy perspective, to address our taxing policy. 49 states run a diesel tax. There's no reason Oregon couldn't too.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate the call.
Jana Jarvis, President and CEO of the Oregon Trucking Association. As Jarvis mentioned, the problem facing trucking operations in Oregon can only be solved by the state's legislature, and in fact, some members of the legislature have taken an interest in the issue. One of those is Representative Shelley Bosshart Davis. Bosshart Davis has a background in trucking. Along with a partner, she operates a company that once belonged to her parents. I spoke with her about the issue, her view of it, and what might happen in the legislature.
It's been shown from reporting to the legislature that this is indeed true. And so there's really no question on whether truckers are being overcharged. The question is, what are we going to do about it? So in our Oregon Constitution, we have to have a fair and proportionate paying for the roads, basically, between how much do cars pay and how much do trucks pay. And so it's supposed to be fair and proportionate. And through their reporting system called HCAS, which is a cost allocation scenario, we have been found to be overpaid by over 30%, which is approximately $200 million a year. And so it's proven, we have the numbers. This is something, as far as gas tax, weight mile tax, whatever you want to call it, it's not very politically expedient. So a lot of people don't want to talk about it and don't want to figure out how we're going to fix this. But certainly we are overpaying our fair share of the roads by an extraordinary amount. We got to do something about it.
How should Oregon's government have handled this situation?
That's a great question. In my opinion, and what myself and Senator Boquist were both vice chairs on the Transportation Committee inside the legislature, what we should have done as soon as we realized what was going on through this report is we should have immediately dropped these weight mile taxes so that we're on par with cars and paying our fair share of the road. If we're overpaying, then immediately drop that. We could have done that at the end of the 2023 session. We chose not to. And so in Oregon, the session ended the end of June. And so we're not in session any longer. And we actually go into session next, starting on Monday. So we're in session as a legislature again. We also had the opportunity to call ourselves into a special session to fix this. And you can do that in two ways here in Oregon. Either the governor can call it, or the legislature can call themselves into session. 2 legislators tried to do that. It wasn't me because I believe that's a conflict of interest, obviously. 2 other legislators did that, and the legislature voted no overwhelmingly. We have a Democrat-led legislature here. So we tried again to fix that problem because it's a constitutional legislative matter. They chose no, not to fix it. And so in my view, OTA and the truckers had no other choice than to go into the courts and say, we're being overcharged, you need to do something.
You mentioned that the legislative session is about to start here. Has there been any bill pre-filed, or are you aware of a bill that's going to be filed that would deal with this situation?
Yes, there's actually 3, which I would say is really a big deal. I have a bill, Senator Boquist has a bill, and Senator Lynn Findley also has a bill. And during the short session, it's only a 5-week session here in Oregon that starts on Monday. Each legislator only gets 2 priority bills. So the fact that 3 legislators chose one of their priority bills to fix this problem is really a big deal. With the multitude of issues that Oregon has, this was one that 3 different legislators said, yes, we're going to work to try to fix this. So yes, there will be opportunity to fix it. Will the legislature act? In my crystal ball, knowing the makeup of it and knowing that there's really no good solutions, I would suggest that they won't, but we will be ready for it in any possibility, in any way that we can. But of course, there is this lawsuit that's also going on at the same time.
Representative, that's all I have. Is there anything else that you want to add or that you think people need to be aware of about this situation in Oregon?
Yeah, here in Oregon, we're actually number 1 in the nation of cost to operate a truck by $8,000 per truck, even over California. Now that I think would be shocking to most people. And we've been number 1 for years, according to, I think it's the American Trucking Association that ranks these based off of taxes, fees, road mile tax, everything. You put that together, diesel tax, and we're number 1 to the tune of $8,000 more per truck. That's absurd. That is incredible to think that we're paying that much. And this obviously is one of the problems. We're simply paying too much. And so Oregon has had a short history, I believe, of not valuing the trucking industry as they should. It's making it very expensive, but also more importantly than that, or just as important, is that those costs, those trickle down to the average consumer and paying too much for the cost of these goods to be delivered. And that's really the bottom line, is all of those costs are passed down to those consumers and they're just paying too much. And we know the cost of living is very expensive these days, and this is one of the reasons why.
State Representative Shelley Bosshart Davis of Oregon. Check for updates on this situation at landline.media. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Penske owns and operates some of the best-maintained vehicles on the planet. Our used trucks come with a 5-year maintenance report and pre-sale inspection. So if you're in the market for a top-quality pre-owned truck, look no further. Search our inventory today at PenskeUsedTrucks.com.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now, welcome back. Like tires, fuel, and an engine, insurance is one of those things you just have to have for your truck. But not all insurance is created equal. Ashley Blackford is here with the experts from OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department to answer some questions.
Thanks, Mark, and hello to Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby with OOIDA's Insurance Department. How are you doing today, ladies?
Fantastic.
Great.
Now, today we are talking about the negative impact of increasing insurance minimum limits. It feels like this is a bit of a broken record at this point with absolutely everything increasing. What is the talk currently when it comes to insurance minimums?
Well, it's actually something that continues to come up. We continue to hear about this coming up from Congress, or, sometimes it's a certain state. A lot of times it's across the board. And it hasn't been pushed through successfully yet, which we're grateful for. And that's kind of why we want to talk about this, is because we find it coming up again. And, honestly, we've discussed it so many times, and it's really, we just don't see how it's going to behoove the public. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's going to behoove, probably attorneys. Yeah. I mean, there's probably people that would gain from this, but overall, no.
Really, the studies have shown that over 99% of the truck-involved accidents that result in property damage don't exceed the current minimum limit. So, I mean, that's really kind of the important thing to remember when we're talking about, yes, everything is increasing, but truck insurance has a high minimum limit of $750,000. So typically, like I said, 99% of the time, that's going to cover what's needed in the event of these accidents.
Well, and working in the industry that we do, we see claims all the time. We see accidents all the time. Even if they're not with people insured by us, maybe we're just doing a quote for someone. And, we have to ask, have you had any accidents in the last, 3 years, 5 years, depending on the insurance company? But, you hardly ever, like Trista said, it's well over 90%. Mm-hmm. So it's just not often at all that you hear of a payout that high in regards to liability.
Now, this bill wants to take it from $750,000 up to $5 million?
I think that's the latest. Yeah, wow. $5 million.
What's the reasoning for that?
I think your guess is as good as ours. I actually was trying to look at further information this morning on that. I'm sure someone who spends their time, digging into stuff, researching journalism type stuff, they probably could find an answer quicker than I. But
I mean, one of the broad reasons that's always given is to make highways safer. Yeah. But I mean, again, this just sort of goes back to that thing that we already know. How does raising a minimum insurance for trucks only to $5 million make our highways safer? It makes insurance less affordable. And so it's going to make it harder for people to be in trucking in general. Mm-hmm. But I can't see from an insurance perspective how it makes highways safer.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know that a semi-truck is going to cause more damage than a four-wheeler, a personal auto. But let's look at the fact, too, that there's some states that still only require like $10,000 or $25,000 on a personal auto. And the truck drivers are carrying usually $1 million. Like Trista said, $750,000 is the minimum, but almost everyone carries $1 million.
And truck drivers are the only ones that are federally. I mean, Trina brings up a good point. Personal autos are able to do whatever the state requires, regardless of what states they're traveling in. But, truckers are federally mandated to have that limit. with, official filings from the insurance company and that sort of thing as well. So they already have stricter guidelines, limits, those sort of things in place than a personal auto anyway, which, like she mentioned, is probably good considering that, it's a bigger piece of equipment and that sort of thing. But $5 million is excessive.
Who sets the limits, and then does it differ with what you haul?
I mean, the limits are set by FMCSA. Yes, it does differ depending on what you haul. Really, hazmat requires a higher limit. And
I think it is the 5 mil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which makes sense because it's hazardous material.
Yeah.
You're calling EPA.
And that's really going to depend on the type of hazmat that's being hauled. I mean, there are certain hazardous materials. I'm sure car haulers are aware that they have to have $1 million minimum limit as opposed to that $750, just because of the gas that could be in their tanks of the vehicles that they're hauling. So there are different limits for different hazardous materials. But I mean, that's one of the big ones that sort of stands out as a requirement for a higher limit.
It's kind of crazy to think if this does go through. I mean, somebody hauling paper towel has the same minimum as somebody hauling fuel.
Right.
Yeah.
That's essentially what it would come down to, right?
It's crazy to me. I mean, we talked about this a little off the air, and it does make more sense with hazardous material, especially fuel, things of that nature, because if there's an accident or a spill and EPA has to get involved, I mean, it's going to take a lot to get the earth back to where it was prior to that.
And I think one of the thoughts that I've had personally, and I'm sure other people within the commercial truck insurance industry have, is that if the minimum limits for everything else raises to $5 million, are we going to see an increase on hazardous materials to something even further beyond that?
Well, and they would almost have an easier time increasing it at that point. If this ever passes and the minimum limit is $5 million, then why wouldn't they increase the requirement for hazardous material?
Kind of an obvious question. Obviously, what's the biggest concern when it comes to this? Obviously, we've mentioned premium rates would go up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, of course, again, being a truck insurance agent my whole life, I think that's the thing that I worry the most about is what it would do to insurance premiums, because an insurance company is not going to be willing to take on the extra risk. If they have a $1 million risk right now, that's the maximum their insurance is going to pay. And, premiums have already increased over the last few years especially. Mm-hmm. And so to think about what a $5 million risk would cost an insurance company to insure, I mean, that's one of my biggest fears for what it would do to the industry.
Well, and then you have to think about the ripple effect. So commercial insurance is already expensive. Like Trista said, there's already been rate increases. We've already seen it go up. And obviously, if you're having to insure for $5 million, you're going to see an even further increase, a very, very dramatic increase. And freight rates are low. They always have been, in a lot of situations. I won't say it is every single time, but for most people, they're low and they struggle to make enough to pay their insurance. So, if they have to start shelling out that much more for insurance, then they're going to have to get more in freight rates. And then that is going to ripple effect into the economy itself, because then the shippers are going to charge more for the product so they can pay the trucker more, so they can pay the insurance. And it's something that will affect the whole country. Even if you don't drive, it's going to have its impact.
It's going to have a huge economic impact on all of us in the end.
Now, we've all heard the stories of people who purposely get into accidents with trucks because I think you girls have said more often than not, truck drivers' insurance are likely the ones to have to pay out despite who's at fault. What is the fear if these minimums do increase to $5 million?
I mean, I think we're already seeing some policy limit type verdicts in cases that we didn't see coming before. I mean, we hear the term a lot, all of a sudden, nuclear verdicts. And I think, the fear is that you're going to see $5 million verdicts that, I would say 5 years ago might have been $100,000 type case, you know, for, you know, we hear soft tissue injuries or that sort of thing. You know, that's really the fear is what those lawsuits would increase to, because we've already seen them increase so much over the last few years anyway.
Well, and I think it's something we're continuing to learn more about as well, because we're finding out, we're a little more educated now as far as the process that these claims go through. So, you know, there's an attorney that says, oh, go to the doctor, get this checked, get that checked. You know, maybe a surgery is needed. And we're finding out even unnecessary surgeries, because all of that is going to increase the amount of payout. Well, the attorney is getting a percentage of that payout. And I'm not here to slam attorneys and say they're all going to do this or they're all terrible, but it has happened. It does happen. And, you know, people are going through unnecessary medical procedures, and I can only imagine that if the limits increase,
you're just going to see more of that.
Might see more of that, yeah.
How else could this affect insurance companies?
I think, and this is only speculation, but kind of going back to what we were talking about with the ripple effect on the economy in general and the population, I don't think there's a lot of insurance companies that are used to selling a $5 million policy. And if they have to try and acclimate to that, I think it's possible that they could maybe set their rates too low, and then a couple of big payouts like that, I think it could, you know, put a company out of business. I just don't think there's enough experience with it to know really what the risk is, what to charge, and it's going to be defining, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's just such a large number, you know, for an insurance company to even speculate, you know, if they haven't done hazardous materials in the past, so they don't really know, you know, haven't set limits or premiums for these $5 million limits. You're not talking about increasing the limits from $1 million to $2 million. You're talking about increasing them over 5 times their current limit, you know, the $750. Right. I mean, it's just hard to decide what, you know, a premium should be, or what kind of impact that's even going to have, or, you know, our verdict's going to stay closer to the $1 million price range, and you've overpriced and had this huge economic impact. You know, it's just hard to say, really.
Yeah,
hard to speculate at this point.
It's new territory for, I think, a lot.
Yeah.
Because honestly, we talked about hazmat, some types of hazmat requiring $1 million. I still don't think there's a whole lot of insurance companies that will offer that. It's a huge risk to take on. And, you know, there's going to be a lot of insurance companies that will not quote hazmat. Number one, because it is risky. Number two, because of the limit. So it's, like I said, I think it's going to be defining for a lot of insurance companies trying to navigate that new territory.
Do you think it's fair to say this would put a lot of small business truckers out of business if this were to go through?
I think it's a safe assumption, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we see it already. You know, we already see people going out of business because freight rates are too low or because insurance is too high. And not just insurance. You know, the cost of operating is expensive, you know, and if you don't charge enough, if you don't charge enough as far as the freight rates go, you know, it's just something we already see a lot of. So I think this would definitely drive that up.
Now, for those listening and thinking, you know, how can I voice my concern or make a difference? You can visit fightingfortruckers.com. There on the homepage, you will see a link where you can contact your lawmakers to tell them that raising your insurance requirements is wholly unnecessary, would do nothing to improve highway safety, and would have a severe negative impact by significantly increasing your operational costs. Fightingfortruckers.com. Very easy, only takes a couple of minutes, and could make a huge difference. Trina, Trista, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Our thanks to Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby of OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department. If you have any questions about insurance, you can call 816-229-5791. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. We'll be back after this.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a cat scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget miss accuracy when you truck on a cat scale.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
And we're back on the home stretch now, and Keith Goebel of Landline Magazine is going to bring us home with a couple updates from a couple states making moves related to the trucking industry. Keith, good to see you.
Scott, how's it going?
Doing great over here. Let's start in Colorado, where there is a bipartisan bill that's raising some eyebrows there. We're going to get into this one. A lot to unpack here, including new possible chain laws and some restrictions on commercial trucks. Let's start with the possible changes to the current chain law in Colorado.
Yeah, with this legislation, as you mentioned, multiple provisions that related to trucks. So they're trying to get accomplished in one bill, and we'll see what movie am I referring to. We'll see how it works out for them, Cotton.
Yeah.
It's a
what is that? That's dodgeball. Yeah.
Reference.
Yeah.
But
bold
yeah.
strategy, Cotton.
But yeah, first and foremost on this list, effort to revise chain law requirements as it is now. The Colorado DOT, they're allowed. They can issue closures or require certain equipment like tire chains on I-70 during the fall and actually through the winter, so specifically September 1st through the end of May. They can do that on an annual basis, again, with the focus being I-70. But with this legislation, it would expand that. It would cover a requirement for trucks to have chains when they're traveling on I-25 and any interstate. Any U.S. highway or state highway that is located west of I-25. So looking to do quite a bit of expansion, again, on the chain law requirement.
So that's, again, just one aspect of this. A lot of stuff in this one bill here. The one that I think is potentially, actually there's a couple here, but one thing that's going to potentially raise the most concern amongst our listeners is this possible left lane rule change that they're talking about. Let's go into this and what exactly it would mean for truck drivers in the state there.
Yeah, and I'm trying to recall how long ago it was that we talked about left lane legislation across the country.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, by and large, this is it's a normal topic that you see in, I don't know, a neighborhood of about a dozen states a year that look for some sort of revision, and it would definitely be considered to be in the minority whenever you have legislation that singles out trucks. And hey, Colorado being very unique this year with legislation that singles out trucks. Worth pointing out that the state already prohibits trucks from traveling in the left lane through Glenwood Canyon. What the legislation would do is it would apply a left lane restriction for trucks when they're traveling on I-70, at least a portion of I-70. We're talking about specifically the stretch between Glenwood Springs and Morrison. The only exception, the only allowance for trucks to use the left lane in that stretch of roadway, if this bill were to be approved, would be is if you're coming up on a vehicle that's driving below the posted speed limit. That is the only exception as written into this provision.
Gotcha. Yeah, and then this kind of, folds into this other issue that they're looking at as well. Speed limit enforcement zones, commercial motor vehicles would be the focus of this one as well. So they're really, at least in terms of this bill, cracking down on what they feel is a problem with commercial vehicles there. And this is a big one here.
Yeah. They, I want to say the understanding that they're trying to convey to lawmakers is that trucks are causing a problem out there. And specifically, again, that stretch of I-70 in Glenwood Canyon, they would have heightened speed limit enforcement in those stretches. Again, saying that they believe that trucks are causing a problem along that stretch. So their intent here is to double the fines for trucks that are found to be driving above the speed limit, again, in that specific area. It's worth pointing out, and I have, Doug Morris, OOIDA's Director of State Government Affairs, provided a comment for the story and questioning the figures that are provided, or the lack of statistics that are provided on this. They're just putting this out there and not actually providing any information to back it up. And that is a concern, again, whenever you're talking about how it could financially affect folks.
Yeah, lots in this one. They're also looking at maybe increasing the number of chain-up stations and rest areas in the state there as well. This is in the Senate Transportation and Energy Committee right now, I believe, Keith.
Yes.
And we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, it is. You mentioned the chain-up areas that they want to study the feasibility of adding to those locations. It is interesting, I guess, in quotes, to point out that they would use the increased penalties from a speed limit enforcement zone that they're pursuing. They would use those penalties to help fund the additional chain-up areas. Mm-hmm. As again, Doug Morris pointed out, I'm quite certain that truckers are already paying a good amount of money through taxes and fees and tolls there in Colorado. They should be able to cover the cost of these additional chain-up areas just with that. So, nevertheless.
Colorado truckers out there, you may want to call your representative there in the state and let them know what you think about this particular bill. You can go to Keith's story on landline.media for updates and information on that. Let's move on to Georgia now, Keith, where state lawmakers are taking up some issues raised by truck drivers in the state. A lot to unpack here as well, but this all got started with a special legislative panel, I believe, that met last year, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, folks might recall here in past few months that panel, probably most known for their title, which was they're looking into addressing a truck driver shortage. They had this special panel that met in the summer into the fall. They wrapped up their work late in the year with a list of recommendations that are intended to obviously benefit truck drivers with, again, a truck driver shortage really being the headline of this, but there were some definite recommendations that were included that could be impactful and aren't necessarily related to the position that there's a shortage of truck drivers out there, but trying to make some impactful beneficiary changes for truck drivers. And one of those, and the state's insurance commissioner was really adamant about this whenever they were having their meetings, is that they needed to address their direct action law, pointing out that Georgia is one of only a handful of states that has a direct action law, which allows a plaintiff to take direct action against the trucking insurance company, feeling that needs to be repealed. And even though there were more than a dozen recommendations made for being hopeful that the legislature would bring them up during the 2024 session, the direct action repeal is the first recommendation that has been brought up in legislation. So they are now pursuing that with a Senate bill. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and the bill there specifically would place a limit, right, on lawsuits that are filed by people injured in truck-related incidents. And there's a long history of this in Georgia, but this would essentially put limits on that, right?
Exactly. Okay. Yes. So, trying to do something in a positive direction to help those in the industry.
Yeah, an interesting thing there, again, starting out as investigating this so-called driver shortage, but they did come up with different ideas and different information that is potentially going to lead them down a path of, doing things that help the truck driving community there in Georgia. So we'll keep an eye on that. Keith, we know you'll keep us updated on this story and many others. Landline.media is the place to check out your stuff. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And that's our show for today. We do thank you for listening, and we'll catch you right back here again soon for more news and analysis from the trucking industry. Until next time, take care and drive safe.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome,
and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.